For most of the 1700 years since the Roman Emperor Constantine decided to build himself a new capital at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, the city we now know as Istanbul has been at the very epicenter of world history. It's been the seat of power for successive East Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman empires, as well as a spiritual, philosophical, and cultural melting pot for the belief systems of East and West. By its own spectacular standards, the last few decades have been relatively low profile for both Istanbul and the rest of modern-day Turkey. But the country and its commercial capital are now gradually reclaiming their central position on the world stage. Turkey is back in the headlines for a number of reasons. The long-running debate about its membership of the EU, where the general consensus may now be turning in the country's favour. Istanbul's selection as next year's European City of Culture. US President Barack Obama's spring visit, his first to a country where the majority of citizens are Muslim. And, most recently, Istanbul has hosted the annual meeting of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. While the dignitaries and technocrats present at the October 2009 IMF summit were largely preoccupied with the global financial crisis, discussions also took place between the host nation and the IMF about Turkey's potential requirement for fresh funding in order to store up investor confidence and to meet its external financial requirements. No agreement had been reached at the time of writing, but the technocrats in particular cannot have failed to be impressed by the robust state of Turkey's financial sector, and may even have picked up a tip or two. It's less than 10 years since one of the worst financial crises in Turkey's history precipitated the nationalisation or liquidation of more than 20 banks. Under a decade later, those financial institutions that survived appear to be weathering the near meltdown of the world's banking system with admirable resilience. Even in the face of the current global recession and a 30% drop in the value of the Turkish lira against the US dollar, not one of Turkey's top banks is in the remotest danger of following the likes of Lehman Brothers into liquidation. They are, on the contrary, thriving. We've weathered the crisis with the least possible damage. There's been no banking system failure and no major bankruptcies, observes Mehmet Simsek, Turkey's Minister of Finance. Manufacturing and exporting have inevitably been affected, he says, and unemployment has risen. But in relation to many countries, Turkey has handled the crisis very well. The key to this success and stability lies in Turkey's hard-hitting but effective response to its own fiscal crisis of 2001. The government not only imprisoned scores of senior bank executives from the collapsed organisations, the central bank was made independent and a new regulatory body, the Banking Regulatory and Supervision Agency, or BDDK, was formed. Since then, the BDDK has played a pivotal role in underpinning the stability of the Turkish banking sector. Bankers who break the rules can still end up in jail, and perhaps more importantly, the agency went against the perceived wisdom that prevailed during the 2003-07 bull market by raising minimum capital adequacy ratios by 12%. Although these measures were not universally popular at the time, few would now argue with their effectiveness. Between 2001 and 2008, Turkey averaged an annual GDP growth of 7%, and even the central bank's prediction of a 6 to 7% inflation rate for 2009 pales in comparison to the 70% of the 1990s that many of its citizens still recall with a shudder. Ersin Özinca is both chairman of the Bankers Association of Turkey and CEO of IS Bank, the first financial institution to be established after the birth of modern-day Turkey in 1922. He believes that the resurgence of the Turkish financial sector is consistent with its history, as well as a harbinger of the future. The Turkish Republic has been applying pro-market rules for many decades now, he explains, and the banking culture, insurance and related areas are in line with European disciplines. Turkey is the only country outside the EU that set out a Basel roadmap. We have a conventional shallow system that's based on real business and simple facts, Özinca continues. Both Özinca and Ergun Özen, president of Guarantee Bank, envisage Turkey's banking sector reclaiming its position as an international financial hub. But neither of them are under any illusions about the challenges ahead. We really have a lot of work to do to get there, Ozan says. It'll entail improving our infrastructure and transforming our tax, legal and educational systems. The banking sector will come out of this crisis very strongly, but we still have a lot more to do. The strategy and focus are there, now we just have to do it. So far the omens are good and the banking sector is already driving a boom in Turkey's domestic capital markets. Istanbul's bourse has been one of the world's best performing stock markets this year, driven by record low interest rates, a drop in inflation and a flurry of both mergers and acquisitions and project finance loans. Turkey is very much on the international investment map again. Turkey's tourist industry as a whole can look to the future with confidence. As the designated European City of Culture for 2010, both Istanbul and the rest of Turkey have a one-off opportunity to showcase their cultural life and development. And while there's much more to Istanbul than the Blue Mosque, Hagia Sophia and Topkapi Palace for visitors to discover, there's also much more to modern Turkey than Istanbul. Large parts of Turkey, and especially Antalya, are an outdoor museum, explains Ayen Bektas, chairman of the Hotel Management and Tour Operating OTI Group. The attractions range from the site of Troy up in Gallipoli to the sarcophagus of St. Nicholas down in Demre Antalya, which most people think is somewhere in Scandinavia, he continues. Obviously, Istanbul's year as cultural capital of Europe gives the entire country the opportunity of truly reaching out to the world and telling everybody about our cultural heritage, he says. Turkey is neither an Islamic nor a European country. People should come here to learn about the East Roman, Byzantine and Ottoman empires and see the beauty of our shared heritage. Istanbul's year in the spotlight will also give a boost to Turkey's more mass-market tourist attractions, namely the summer resorts of Antalya's Mediterranean and Black Sea. While its proximity to Western Europe and the favourable exchange rate against the euro have made Turkey's Mediterranean coastline increasingly popular with northern Europeans looking for some sun, sand and sea, what is frequently overlooked is the size and potential of the Turkish tourist industry's Russian customer base. Of the 26.3 million tourists who visited the country in 2008, it's estimated that 2.8 million of these were from Turkey's eastern neighbour. But for Burak Kaya, president of the Kaya Holding Tourist Group, next year also offers his industry a golden opportunity to chase the luxury end of the tourist market from both its east and its west. People are getting to know Turkey, he says. Many of the international working class know more locations inside the country than most Turks do. What the tourist resorts are lacking is the luxury traveller. At the moment, around 90% of the high-quality tourists who come to Turkey only visit Istanbul. If the Turkish tourist industry is looking for one particular means of luring well-heeled visitors away from the cultural attractions of Istanbul or the sunbeds of Antalya, then it could do worse than look to the largely untapped health tourism market. While a growing number of Western Europeans already visit Turkey for routine medical operations, the country is also blessed with some 1,500 thermal springs. This is a market with a capacity to attract 15 million visitors a year, according to the Minister of Tourism, Ertuğrul Günay. It's not just hope that springs eternal in today's Turkey.